was it a whisper that changed everything? A single moment that altered the course of humanity forever. Think about it. One conversation between a serpent and a woman that supposedly condemned us all. But what if everything you've been told about this story was incomplete? What if Lucifer wasn't just a tempter, but perhaps the key to humanity's awakening? Or what if God allowed it all to happen as part of a divine plan we've never fully understood? The Garden of Eden, paradise lost. But was it ever truly paradise if we weren't free to choose? Today, we're going to explore one of the most controversial questions in all of biblical history. Was Lucifer's temptation of Eve an act of malice or liberation? Was it free will in action, or a cosmic conspiracy set in motion before time began? Before we dive in, I want you to consider something shocking. What if both God and Lucifer were playing roles in a divine drama that was always meant to unfold exactly as it did? What if the fall of man wasn't a failure of the divine plan, but its fulfillment? The serpent's whisper echoes through time. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? A simple question that shattered everything. Today, we're going to unravel this mystery together, examining ancient texts, hidden meanings, and forgotten wisdom that might just change how you see everything you thought you knew about good and evil, God and Lucifer, freedom and destiny. The morning sun filters through Eden's perfect canopy. A woman reaches for knowledge. A serpent speaks. And nothing would ever be the same again. The serpent appears in the garden, slithering silently across the lush grass of Eden. His scales shimmer in the morning light as he approaches Eve, who stands alone near the forbidden tree. His voice is smooth as silk yet cold as steel. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? The question hangs in the air, innocent, yet loaded with dangerous implications. Eve stands transfixed, her curiosity piqued. The serpent's eyes glitter like flames, both alluring and threatening. She trembles but cannot turn away. In this moment, everything hangs in the balance. The serpent, Lucifer in disguise, isn't forcing anything upon her. He's merely asking a question, planting a seed of doubt. "Honey, Eve whispers in response, "Here I am," the same response Abraham would later give to God. But Eve gives it to the serpent. Is this significant? The Hebrew word carries weight, a declaration of presence, of readiness to engage. Genesis 3:1 tells us the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. But was his craftiness evil, or was it wisdom that God himself had bestowed? Was Lucifer a malevolent tempter or an enlightener, awakening Eve from an imposed innocence? The serpent doesn't push, he doesn't force. He simply questions the status quo. "You will not certainly die," he tells her in Genesis 3:4. Is he lying, or offering a different interpretation of truth? Is curiosity truly the double-edged sword that can either liberate or destroy? What would you have done in Eve's place? Would you have walked away, or would you have listened to the voice that promised knowledge beyond what you'd been allowed to know? The forbidden fruit hangs before Eve, glistening with morning dew. Lucifer doesn't force her hand, but skillfully plants seeds of doubt in her mind. God knows that when you eat from it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil," he whispers. His words are like honey, sweet with promise yet sticky with hidden consequence. Eve reaches toward the fruit, her heart pounding. Is she stepping into freedom or falling into an abyss? The serpent watches, patient and calculating. This moment of choice, is it truly choice if Lucifer has manipulated her thoughts? Is it truly choice if God has predetermined the outcome? Emet v'shikar, Lucifer murmurs. Truth and falsehood in Hebrew are often two sides of the same coin. He's offering Eve a perspective God hasn't given her, suggesting that divine prohibition might be hiding something valuable from humanity. Genesis 3:3 captures the pivotal moment. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. Notice how the text emphasizes Eve's own assessment. She saw, she desired, she took. The agency is hers. Was this Lucifer's conspiracy to destroy humanity? Or was he simply offering Eve the self-determination that God had deliberately withheld? The serpent presents the fruit not as sin but as enlightenment. Date. He calls it knowledge in Hebrew, the very thing that separates the divine from the mortal. If you were Eve, would you bite the forbidden fruit or turn your back on the serpent? Would you choose blissful ignorance or painful knowledge? The power of choice always comes with unforeseeable consequences. The heavens are in turmoil. Angels whisper among themselves as Lucifer risks everything to tempt Eve. The celestial beings watch in horror and fascination as the drama unfolds in Eden below. He wants to destroy God's creation. One angel cries out, but Lucifer, his face illuminated with defiance, responds with a chilling smile. I'm merely showing her the truth that God fears. The confrontation escalates beyond Eden's boundaries. Lucifer stands in the garden, his wings burning with fierce light, while the sky trembles with God's wrath. Is this the moment of true rebellion, or is it all proceeding according to a divine script written before time began? Lotav hiot haladam levado. God had said, "It is not good for man to be alone." But perhaps what Lucifer understood was that it was not good for humans to be without knowledge, without choice, without the capacity to determine their own destiny. In John 8:32, Jesus would later say, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Was Lucifer, in his own twisted way, attempting to set Eve free with truth? Or was he binding her with a half? Truth more dangerous than any lie. The cosmic chess match between God and Lucifer raises profound questions. If God is omniscient, didn't he know Lucifer would tempt Eve? If he knew, why did he allow it? Was Lucifer a traitor or a hero who dared to challenge God's perfect plan? Was he an unwitting pawn in a divine strategy far beyond his comprehension? Ani Maimon, Lucifer declares, "I believe in Hebrew that humans deserve to know what has been hidden from them. But belief and truth are not always the same thing. Truth can be a bitter medicine, but who truly decides when we should take it?" The moment of decision arrives. Eve bites into the forbidden fruit, and her eyes widen as knowledge floods her consciousness. The sweet juice barely touches her lips when God's roar echoes through Eden. Lucifer vanishes into the shadows, leaving Eve alone to face punishment. Has he liberated her or condemned her to tragedy? Genesis 3:7 records the immediate consequence. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. Knowledge brings awareness, and awareness brings shame where there was none before. The innocence of Eden is shattered in a single bite. Ma'asita. God asks Eve, "What have you done?" The Hebrew phrase carries weight beyond simple questioning. It's an invitation to accountability, the first moment where human choice meets divine judgment. Eve stands trembling, caught between newfound knowledge and impending punishment. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate," she says in Genesis 3:12-13. But was she truly deceived, or did she make a conscious choice? Was she a victim of Lucifer's scheme, or a willing participant who chose her path, regardless of consequences? Eve's blood runs cold as she realizes freedom comes at a price, and Lucifer never told the whole truth. He offered knowledge, but concealed its cost. He promised God-like understanding, but failed to mention the burden that comes with it. In Romans 6:2-23, Paul would later write, "For the wages of sin is death." Was this always the inevitable outcome of choice? Did Lucifer know this when he tempted Eve? Or was he himself deceived about the consequences? Free will is humanity's most precious gift, but it isn't free. Someone always pays the price. In Eden's fading light, as Eve faces the reality of her choice, we confront our own daily decisions. Are we truly free to choose, or are we always influenced by forces beyond our understanding? As Adam and Eve are banished from Eden, Lucifer observes from a distance, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "I didn't force her, she chose," he whispers. But deep inside, he knows his plan has succeeded. Humanity now bears his mark, the indelible imprint of rebellion and knowledge. The flaming sword guards Eden's gates, and Lucifer watches the first humans stumble into the wilderness. Is he feeling triumph or remorse? Did he truly believe he was giving Eve a gift, or was it always about defying God's authority? Yetzer hara. The Hebrews would later call it the evil inclination that exists alongside our good impulses. Did Lucifer plant this in humanity, or did he simply activate what was already there, waiting to be awakened? In Revelation 12:3-9, John describes Satan as that ancient serpent called the devil, who leads the whole world astray. But was the world led astray, or was it led toward a different kind of truth? Was humanity destined to remain in childlike innocence forever? Or was the fall always part of our evolution toward spiritual maturity? Lucifer stands on a hillside, darkness spreading from him like wings, while Eden burns behind him. The image is haunting, the birth of human suffering witnessed by its catalyst. Yet in that suffering would come growth, innovation, art, love chosen rather than programmed. Isaiah 14:12 laments, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn." The fall of Lucifer parallels the fall of humanity, both tumbling from grace into a new reality. But falls can also be flights, descents, that enable new kinds of ascension. The intentions of others may guide us, but the final decision always belongs to ourselves. Eve reached for the fruit with her own hand. This truth echoes through time. We are influenced, but ultimately responsible for our choices. A voice thunders from heaven, "You think you've won, Lucifer, but everything remains in my hands." Lucifer responds defiantly, "If so, why did you let her choose?" This dialogue reveals a startling possibility. Perhaps both are puppeteers, pulling strings in a cosmic drama. The confrontation between God and Lucifer transcends Eden. It raises questions that have haunted theologians for millennia. Was the fall a predetermined part of God's plan? Did God allow Lucifer to tempt Eve, knowing exactly what would happen? Bekira Chafshit, the rabbis call it free choice in Hebrew. But if both God and Lucifer knew the outcome, does free will truly exist? Or are we merely actors playing our parts in a script written before time began? In Ephesians 1:1-4, Paul writes that God chose us in him before the creation of the world. This suggests a divine foreknowledge that encompasses even our choices. If God knew Eve would eat the fruit, was Lucifer's temptation merely fulfilling a divine plan rather than thwarting it? The book of Job presents a troubling scene. Satan appears in God's court and is essentially given permission to test Job's faith. Could the Eden scenario have been similar? Lucifer acting with implicit divine permission to test humanity's obedience. Hester Panem, the mystics call it the hiding of the face. Perhaps God's seeming absence during the temptation was itself purposeful, creating space for human choice to manifest. If both God and Lucifer were playing roles in a divine drama, what does this mean for human accountability? If Eve's choice was influenced by Lucifer and anticipated by God, was it truly a choice at all? Sometimes freedom may be an illusion within a larger game whose full dimensions we cannot perceive. Thousands of years later, humanity both creates and destroys, loves and hates, all stemming from that moment when Eve heeded Lucifer. Was he the sower of sin or the catalyst for human potential? In cities and villages across the world, people make daily choices between good and evil, knowledge and ignorance, selfishness and sacrifice. Every choice echoes that first decision in the garden. Lucifer's legacy lives on in humanity's capacity for both tremendous good and horrific evil. Tikkun Olam, the Jewish tradition calls it repairing the world. Perhaps this is the ultimate response to Lucifer's temptation, taking the knowledge he offered and using it not for selfish ends, but to heal creation's wounds. In Romans 5:12, Paul writes, "Sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin." But in verse 20, he adds, "Where sin increased, grace increased all the more." Is this the divine counterpoint to Lucifer's scheme, turning even rebellion into an opportunity for greater redemption? Lucifer looks down at the chaotic world, whispering, "I gave you everything, what have you done with it?" The question hangs in the air, challenging each generation anew. Have we used our knowledge and freedom wisely, or squandered them on selfish pursuits? The story of Eden reminds us that every action leaves consequences, and our legacy depends on how we use what we've been given. Knowledge without wisdom becomes destructive. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. These are the lessons embedded in Lucifer's temptation of Eve. In 1 Corinthians 10:13, Paul assures us that God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Was Eve's temptation calibrated precisely to her capacity? Was Lucifer's role in some sense necessary for humanity's spiritual development? Every choice we make ripples through time, affecting generations yet unborn. Should Lucifer be cursed for tempting Eve, or honored for giving humanity the ability to determine its own destiny? The story closes with an image of Eve, standing amid the ruins of Eden. The forbidden fruit rolling at her feet, and Lucifer's shadow dissolving into the mist. Was he a destroyer or a liberator? The question remains unanswered, echoing through the corridors of time. Genesis 3:24 tells us God placed cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. But notice the tree of knowledge remains unguarded. Once taken, knowledge cannot be returned. Once awakened, consciousness cannot return to slumber. Teshuvah, the Hebrew tradition calls it return or repentance. But the return is never to innocence. It's to a higher integration that includes knowledge, but transcends its potential for harm. Is free will Lucifer's gift stolen from God, or a trap he set to bind humanity forever? The question lingers as we face our own daily temptations and choices. If you met Lucifer right now, would you thank him or curse him? Would you acknowledge him as the catalyst for human consciousness, or condemn him as the author of human suffering? In 2 Corinthians 11:14, Paul warns that Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. The line between illumination and deception has always been thin. Lucifer's name itself means light, bearer, a reminder that even destructive forces can come disguised as enlightenment. Life is a series of choices, and no one, not even Lucifer, can take responsibility for us. Each day we face our own forbidden fruits, our own whispered temptations, our own moments of decision between what is easy and what is right. The serpent's whisper still echoes in our ears. Did God really say? The question challenges authority, tradition, limitation. Sometimes this questioning leads to liberation, sometimes to destruction. The wisdom lies in knowing the difference. What if the true purpose of Eden was never permanent innocence, but the journey toward conscious choice? What if Lucifer, despite his intentions, was fulfilling a necessary role in the divine plan? What if the fall was always meant to be a rising? The Garden of Eden story reveals a profound truth. Knowledge brings both power and pain. When Eve ate the fruit, humanity gained the capacity to create its own destiny, but lost the security of divine protection. Was this exchange worth it? The answer differs for each person who considers it. Vihavtal orichi kamoka, the Torah commands, love your neighbor as yourself. This ethical imperative emerges only in a post-Eden world where humans must consciously choose compassion over selfishness. Perhaps this capacity for chosen love, rather than programmed obedience, was the ultimate divine goal. In John 1:35, we read, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Even after Lucifer's temptation, divine light persists in human consciousness. Perhaps this is the greatest refutation of his scheme, that knowledge of good and evil ultimately leads many back to choosing good. The story of Eden isn't just about a past event, but about an ongoing reality. Each day, we stand before our own trees of knowledge, making choices that shape our character and destiny. In this sense, we are all Eve, and Lucifer's whisper takes many forms in our lives. What was Lucifer's true motivation? Was it jealousy of God's new creation, as many traditions suggest? Was it a genuine belief that humans deserved knowledge? Or was it simply his nature to oppose, to question, to challenge the established order? In Matthew 4, Jesus faces his own temptation from Satan in the wilderness. Unlike Eve, he refuses each offer. This parallel suggests a redemptive counterpoint to Eden's story, the possibility of facing temptation and choosing differently. The Hebrew word for serpent, nakash, is related to the word for divination or perception. Was Lucifer offering a kind of perception that was both true and dangerous? Knowledge without the wisdom to use it properly. If we accept that both God and Lucifer played roles in humanity's development, we might see them as representing different but necessary aspects of reality, structure and disruption, order and chaos, preservation and transformation. Perhaps both energies are needed for creation to evolve. The most troubling question remains: if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, why create a scenario where humanity would fall? The traditional answer, that free will necessitated the possibility of disobedience, only raises more questions. Was our fall into knowledge actually a rise into spiritual adulthood? Eve stands at the crossroads of human history. Her choice reverberates through time, touching every life that has followed. Was she the first sinner or the first hero? The first to fail or the first to dare? Perhaps she was both, as complex and contradictory as the humanity she mothered. Lucifer promised Eve that eating the fruit would make her like God, knowing good and evil. In a sense, he told the truth. Humanity did gain moral knowledge. But this knowledge came with a burden God had perhaps tried to protect us from: the weight of moral responsibility. In Genesis 3:27, we read that humans were created in God's image. If so, perhaps the capacity for choice, even rebellious choice, was always part of our divine design. Perhaps Eden was never meant to be permanent, but was instead a starting point for a greater journey. The Midrash, ancient Jewish commentary, suggests that the tree of knowledge was not yet ripe when Eve ate from it. Had she waited, God might have eventually permitted its fruit. This perspective frames the sin not as eating the fruit, but as taking it before the proper time, impatience rather than disobedience. Archaeological discoveries continue to unearth ancient texts that offer alternative perspectives on the Eden story. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, contains Gnostic texts that sometimes portray the serpent as a heroic figure, bringing knowledge to humanity against the wishes of a possessive creator. Modern DNA research has revealed the complexity of human evolution. Some theologians have attempted to reconcile scientific findings with the Eden narrative by suggesting that the fall represents a spiritual rather than physical event, perhaps the awakening of moral consciousness in evolving hominids. The story of Eden raises questions about authority and rebellion that remain relevant in today's political landscape. When is questioning authority righteous, and when is it destructive? When is tradition a protection, and when is it a limitation? These questions echo through our social movements and political debates. In entertainment and popular culture, Lucifer often appears as a complex, sympathetic character rather than a one-dimensional villain. Shows like Lucifer and books like Milton's Paradise Lost explore the nuance of his rebellion. This reflects our modern understanding that truth is rarely simple and that even destructive forces may contain elements of righteousness. The Hebrew phrase tav vara, good and evil, suggests not just moral categories, but a comprehensive knowledge of everything. Perhaps what Eve gained was not just moral awareness, but full consciousness, the mixed blessing of seeing reality in all its complexity. In Genesis 3:22, God says, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil." This plural reference has puzzled scholars for centuries. Who are the us God refers to? And if knowing good and evil makes humans like divine beings, was Lucifer telling the truth after all? The concept of Yetzer Hara's evil inclination in Jewish thought is balanced by Yetzer Hadasev, good inclination. Both are considered necessary for human existence. Without desire and self-interest, we would never build, create, or even reproduce. Perhaps Lucifer's temptation activated this necessary duality within humanity. The serpent in Eden has parallels in many ancient cultures. The Sumerian god Enki was associated with serpents and brought forbidden knowledge to humans. The Greek Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humanity. These recurring motifs suggest a universal human recognition that knowledge brings both power and pain. Dat, the Hebrew word for knowledge that appears in the Eden story, implies not just intellectual understanding but intimate experience. When Adam knew Eve, the same word is used. This suggests that what humanity gained in Eden was not just information, but experiential wisdom, the lived reality of both joy and suffering. When God pronounces consequences in Genesis 3, notice that the serpent is cursed directly, but humans receive consequences that are described but not explicitly called curses. Could this distinction be significant? Is there a difference between punishment and natural consequence? The Garden of Eden story appears in the Quran as well as the Bible, with some significant differences. In the Islamic telling, Satan, Iblis, tempts both Adam and Eve together, and their repentance is immediately accepted. This perspective emphasizes divine mercy over punishment and shared rather than feminine responsibility. In Revelation 22, the final chapter of the Bible, the tree of life reappears in the New Jerusalem, with leaves for the healing of the nations. This suggests a restoration of what was lost in Eden. Yet interestingly, the tree of knowledge does not reappear. Has its purpose been fulfilled? Has humanity permanently integrated its fruit? Havai, Eve's name in Hebrew, means life or living. There's profound irony that the woman whose choice supposedly brought death into the world is named for life itself. Perhaps this suggests that what we perceive as death or fall is actually a different kind of life, one with both greater pain and greater possibility. What if the serpent's greatest deception wasn't convincing Eve to eat the fruit, but convincing humanity ever after that knowledge and consciousness are sins rather than gifts? What if our shame about our awakening has been more damaging than the awakening itself. In John 10:10, Jesus says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." This presents a stark contrast between Lucifer's offering and Christ's. One brought knowledge with suffering, the other offers restoration without loss of consciousness. The DNA of every human being contains the story of our origins and evolution. Science tells us we are all connected, all descended from common ancestors. This biological unity echoes the biblical claim that all humans descend from Adam and Eve. Science tells us we are all connected, all descended from common ancestors. This biological unity echoes the biblical claim that all humans descend from Adam and Eve. When we look at the world's injustices and sufferings, it's easy to blame Lucifer's temptation as the origin of evil. Yet, when we look at human creativity, compassion, and moral courage, we must acknowledge these also emerged from our consciousness. The same knowledge that enables cruelty also enables kindness. Teshuka, the Hebrew word used when God tells Eve your desire will be for your husband, appears only 3 times in the Bible. The second is when God tells Cain that sin's desire is for you, but you must rule over it. This linguistic connection suggests that desire itself, for knowledge, for connection, for power, is neutral but must be properly governed. The concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, suggests that human purpose includes healing creation's brokenness. If Eden represents perfection, and the fall represents brokenness, perhaps human destiny is neither return to innocence nor acceptance of corruption, but active participation in restoration. In 1 Corinthians 13:11, Paul writes, "When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." Perhaps Eden represents humanity's childhood, and the fall represents our difficult but necessary maturation into moral responsibility. The Hebrew phrase tohu vavohu, often translated as formless and void, describes the state of creation before God's ordering. Some Jewish mystics see the fall as a return to this creative chaos, a necessary disruption that enables new forms of order to emerge. In this view, Lucifer's role, while destructive, serves an ultimately constructive purpose. Ani Mammon Baimuna Shlema begins a traditional Jewish affirmation, "I believe with perfect faith." Faith, after Eden, cannot be the naive trust of innocence, but must be the chosen commitment of those who have seen both good and evil and still choose good. Perhaps this more mature faith was always the divine goal. The serpent tells Eve, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." But in Jeremiah 3:33, God promises, "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." These two passages present contrasting paths to moral knowledge, one seized through rebellion, the other received as gift. Perhaps both are necessary stages in humanity's spiritual evolution. Modern psychology recognizes that moral development requires moving from blind obedience to internalized ethical principles. Children initially follow rules simply to avoid punishment. But mature adults act ethically because they've integrated moral values. Perhaps Eden represents this necessary transition in human consciousness. The Kabbalah, Jewish mystical tradition, speaks of Shevrat ha-Kilim, the breaking of the vessels. This concept suggests that sometimes breaking is necessary for higher restoration. The fall breaks the perfect, but limited vessel of Eden to allow for the greater perfection of conscious, chosen righteousness. When Adam and Eve hide from God after eating the fruit, God calls out, "Where are you?" This question seems strange coming from an omniscient deity. Perhaps it's not a request for information, but an invitation to self-awareness, the first step in the journey from shame back to relationship. In Genesis 3:221, before expelling Adam and Eve from Eden, God makes garments of skin for them. This act of care amid punishment suggests divine compassion, persisting through consequence. Even as humans must face the results of their choices, they are not abandoned by their Creator. The Hebrew word for serpent, nachash, shares its root with the word for bronze, nekoshet. In Numbers 21, Moses creates a bronze serpent that heals those who look upon it. This connection suggests a mysterious redemptive potential within the very symbol of temptation. What wounded can also heal. In the Gnostic text, the testimony of truth, found among the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, the serpent is portrayed as a revealer of truth rather than a deceiver. This alternative interpretation reminds us that history is written by the victors, and our understanding of Lucifer's role may be limited by the perspectives that have dominated religious tradition. The concept of felix culpa, or fortunate fall, emerges in Christian theology, suggesting that Adam's sin, while tragic, created the conditions for a greater good, the redemption through Christ. As the Easter liturgy proclaims, "O happy fault that earned for us so great, so glorious a Redeemer." This perspective sees even Lucifer's temptation as ultimately serving divine purposes. When we examine the Eden narrative alongside modern understandings of human development, interesting parallels emerge. Developmental psychology recognizes that adolescence necessarily involves questioning authority and testing boundaries. Perhaps humanity's fall represents not failure, but a necessary developmental stage in our collective spiritual evolution. The Hebrew word Adam means not just the first man's name, but humanity itself. This linguistic connection reminds us that the Eden story is not just about historical individuals, but about the human condition. Each of us faces our own serpents, our own forbidden fruits, our own choices between obedience and rebellion. In Romans 8:222, Paul writes that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. This metaphor suggests that suffering may be productive, not punishment for a past sin, but labor toward a future birth. Perhaps what we call the fall was actually the beginning of a difficult but necessary transformation. The serpent in Eden has been traditionally identified with Lucifer, but the text itself doesn't make this connection explicit. The association developed over centuries of interpretation. This reminds us that our understanding of sacred stories evolves over time, shaped by cultural contexts and theological needs. When Eve sees that the fruit is good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she is exercising discernment, a godlike quality. Perhaps her sin was not in the discernment itself, but in trusting her own judgment over divine command. Yet isn't the capacity for judgment itself a divine gift? B'Tselem Elohim, the Hebrew phrase for in the image of God, suggests humans were created with God-like qualities from the beginning. If so, perhaps the knowledge gained in Eden was always intended for humanity, not the fact of knowledge but the timing and manner of its acquisition constituted the sin. The word Satan in Hebrew originally meant adversary or accuser, a role rather than a name. In the book of Job, Satan appears as a member of the divine council, challenging Job's integrity. This suggests a more nuanced relationship between God and Lucifer than simple opposition, perhaps even a necessary tension within the divine plan. When God pronounces consequences after the fall, Adam will toil with thorns and thistles, and Eve will have pain in childbirth. Yet both agriculture and reproduction are blessings as well as burdens. This suggests that the post-Eden world is not simply punitive, but complex, filled with intertwined joy and sorrow, effort and reward. In Genesis 2:9, we learn that the tree of life was also in the garden. Interestingly, God does not forbid this tree initially. Only after humans eat from the tree of knowledge is access to eternal life restricted. This suggests that immortality without moral knowledge might have been possible, but immortality with such knowledge presented a danger God was unwilling to risk. The Zohar, a foundational text of Jewish mysticism, suggests that the serpent represents the Sitra Achra, the other side or forces of severity and judgment within creation. These forces are not evil in themselves, but become destructive when separated from divine mercy. Perhaps Lucifer represents a necessary cosmic principle that became imbalanced. In Genesis 3:15, God tells the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This prophecy suggests an ongoing conflict, but also an eventual victory. The serpent's influence is powerful, but not ultimate. The Hebrew concept of kavanah, intention or direction of the heart, suggests that actions alone don't determine righteousness. Perhaps Eve's intention in seeking knowledge was pure, even if her disobedience was wrong, and perhaps Lucifer's intention in offering knowledge was corrupt, even if the knowledge itself was true. When God asks Adam, "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" It's not a request for information from an omniscient deity. It's an invitation to confession and accountability. Even after disobedience, God seeks relationship rather than simply imposing punishment. The story ends with humanity expelled from Eden, but not abandoned by God. Genesis 4 shows God still communicating with Cain and Abel, still involved in human affairs. This suggests that while innocence was lost, relationship remained possible. Perhaps this is the ultimate message. Knowledge brings responsibility, but not separation from the divine. If you've stayed with me through this exploration, you've shown the very quality that defines post-Eden humanity, the desire to know, to understand, to question. This desire can lead us astray when misused, but it can also lead us to deeper truth when guided by wisdom and love. The story of Lucifer and Eve isn't just ancient history. It's playing out in your life right now, in every choice between immediate gratification and lasting good, between self, will and higher purpose, between easy deception and difficult truth. What will you do with the knowledge you've been given? Will you use it to build or to destroy? Will you choose the path of Lucifer, rebellion against divine order, or the path of redemption, using your freedom to restore what has been broken? The choice, as it has always been since that fateful day in Eden, is yours. Tell us what you think in the comments below. Has this exploration changed how you see the story of Eden? Do you view Lucifer as a villain, a liberator, or something more complex? Share your perspective, because the conversation about truth, freedom, and choice continues through each of us. And if this revelation has opened your eyes to new possibilities, share it with others who might be wrestling with these same profound questions. Because in sharing knowledge, unlike the serpent, we aim not to tempt, but to illuminate. Until next time, remember, the greatest power you possess is not knowledge itself, but the wisdom to use it rightly.